Okay, so before we start, I'd firstly like to just acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we meet today, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respects to all people joining us here today. And I'll just do a quick intro for Raj because it's the first one back, our very, very, very first one back for the year. So I'm very excited and feeling a little bit hungry for Massaman curry because I don't know about anybody else, but I'm sitting inside with just deluge and it's been raining for feels like forever. And so, you know, a nice warming Massaman curry would be hit the spot for lunch today. It's not going to happen unless I, you know, go to the kitchen and start cooking along, but you are all welcome to join in. If you do have the stuff there, you can cook along as well too, of course. And Raj is our recipe club member who has very kindly volunteered her time and her skills to share her cooking expertise with us. And the reason we started this recipe club as a way to highlight recipes in our collection, and we do encourage you to, you know, jump on in there and have a look at what the library offers. And I appreciate that some of you are not even in Australia, let alone on the Central Coast. So if you are not local to the Central Coast, just a reminder that your local library usually has loads of recipe books, online recipe databases and things like that. So just remember those people when you're out and about. And I'm not going to talk anymore. We need to start cooking. Welcome, Rash.
Hey, Kathy. Hey, everyone. Good morning. And thank you, Kathy, for that wonderful introduction. So we're doing Massaman curry today. Should I ask if anyone likes Massaman curry? I'm guessing everyone's a fan if they're on this call. Yep. Okay. Does anyone know a little bit of the history about Massaman curry? Is it that worth sharing with everyone this morning before I get started?
Oh, I'd like to know.
Yeah. Cool. Let's do that. So real quick. Massaman curry is a Thai dish. And there are a couple of different stories around how it came about. I'm going to disappear and grab my cup of coffee over here while I talk. So there's been quite a bit of story. Some say it comes from the northern part of Thailand, from the Bonark family, which is part of the original Siamese monarch. Some say it came from the south when sort of the Persian and Indian spice traders would come through the route and cross past Thailand on their way down and over to China. So Massaman is actually a derivation of Musalman, which in Musalman in Urdu or Hindi means Muslim man. So it is actually, by name at least, you know, its heritage goes back to South Asia. So for that, and I say all that because it falls into the recipe. A lot of Massaman curry is actually more of an Indian curry dish, and then it has a couple of Thai elements folded into it, and that's what I think makes it, ironically enough, not as spicy. So Thai dishes are typically quite chili hot. Not all of them, quite a few of them. This dish is, you know, kid friendly. It's actually quite mellow. It does have a bit of chili in it, but it gets offset by the other elements, things like coconut cream and things like that. So it's actually one that, you know, it's more rich and has a lot of flavor because of the spices used than it is sort of a chili curry like you would think of Thai green curry or, you know, maybe even red curry to an extent is quite spicy. So this one isn't. Penang curry is probably spicier than this one as well. Penang curry is a little bit different. It's more from the Malaysian region specifically. Penang is actually an island name in Malaysia. I'm sure some of you have been there, but Massaman curry is quite Indian / creamy goodness sort of a curry. So hopefully that sort of sets the scene for what we'll be doing today in terms of cooking. Typically, it's something that folks have with roti, like Thai roti, but I'm personally a big fan of just, you know, rice. And it's funny because as I was sort of experimenting with this dish to kind of perfect it by my standards, because there are so many different versions of it, I was thinking about, well, what am I going to do with this leftover pineapple juice? Because that is one of the things that goes into Massaman curry. And I ended up making a pineapple coconut rice. And that's a super simple recipe that if anyone's interested, I can quickly run you through how I made it today. But again, it will be released on social media. It pairs really well with this dish because the tanginess, as my partner says, because he really quite liked the Massaman curry. He called it the Rashaman curry, which is quite funny. He said like he liked how the tanginess of the Massaman curry paired quite nicely with the sweetness of the coconut rice and with a pineapple twist in there. So I might quickly show that to you guys if that's going to be helpful. Here, I'm back. I'm just going to switch cameras. I ended up making it. So firstly, is anyone interested in me quickly running through that, or do we want to jump straight into the pineapple curry?
Well,
this is the pineapple curry. You can almost see that there's a little bit of a yellow tinge to it. So I've made some today. It's really simple. All I did was put 400 grams of rice into a pot, and I had 400 mils of coconut cream. So I might actually quickly switch back so you can see me as I talk. This is going to be fun. I'm getting back into my groove, Kathy. It's been a while since I've done a class.
it has.
I might share screen so you can see my other camera while I do the chatting. So we'll probably put, whoop.
So the rice is the rice. It's 400 grams of rice, and it's just what kind of rice is it? Because it doesn't look like short, like.
Yes, I've used basmati, but you're not meant to be very honest. Thai food actually uses long grain jasmine rice. So any long grain jasmine fragrant rice would be great. Soak that in 400 mils of coconut cream, preferably. Coconut milk, if you have it, that's fine too. But what will happen if you leave it for a couple of hours is the coconut milk will go missing and it'll go into the rice. And that's why I like to soak it. It usually takes an hour or two. Then what you do once that's done is you get yourself about 500 mils so half a liter of pineapple juice. And you actually do need to heat that up first. So there is an enzyme in pineapple that if you don't heat up the pineapple juice, it'll leave a bitter aftertaste when mixed with coconut milk. So even for the curry today, I've done that. So just chuck it in the microwave for 30 seconds, just kind of get it heated up so that enzyme gets killed. And then it's ready to go. Just a pinch of salt. So a pot, half a liter of pineapple juice, pinch of salt, get that rolling to a simmer, and then throw the rice in, bring that to a simmer, and then cover the pot and turn the heat way down low for 15 minutes covered. And then once the 15 minutes is up, leave it covered for another 10 minutes, and then just fluff it with a fork. Super simple. Is that simple?
Yum.
For rice, without a rice cooker even. And it comes out really sweet and creamy, which is going to go well with today's Massaman curry.
And how long did you soak it for?
Usually, look, I just soak it until there's no more coconut milk left. Like I just kind of go, and I timed it the day before yesterday when I did it, usually about 1 to 2 hours, depending on the type of rice you're using, should cut it. It's not mandatory for you to do that. I just really want that coconut milk to get into the rice first before anything else. Thank you. And just a pinch of salt to go with it, just because that always brings out the flavor. All right. Get started. So the pre-work, so in the Instagram reel, there is a list of pre-work that you should have done if you had it. And if you haven't, that's totally fine. You can watch me walk through it today, and we can, when you're ready to make it yourself, you can pre-prepare stuff. So I'm going to go through that real quick. So this is something that we'll come back to in a second. I'm going to put him to the side. So I ended up I'm doing a kilo. So I'm doing a double recipe today. So this is a kilo of beef chuck. If you're using beef, I think beef chuck's probably the best to use for Massaman curry because it does need to be slow cooked, and any other type of beef could get really tough in the slow cooker. So this has been cooked in the slow cooker with about 800 mils of coconut cream, along with a couple of other things. So Indian bay leaf, or the traditional Thai recipe calls for turmeric leaf. If you have it, dried turmeric leaf. I didn't. So the next best thing for me was Indian bay leaf, which looks something like this. Hopefully you can see that. So 2 of these go in with the coconut cream. Again, a pinch of salt, and this is going to be fun to share, and Thai cardamoms. Thai cardamoms are different from green cardamoms, the ones that we commonly know. I'll show you both of them next to each other, just so you can take a look and see what they are. So this is, as you would know, a traditional green cardamom, and this is a Thai cardamom. So it's white in color, and it's more, let me make sure you can see that. It's more delicate than the green cardamom. So if, say, for example, you don't have Thai cardamom, and I don't expect many of you to have it, you would just take 2/3 of the quantity of Thai cardamom to put into the curry instead, because that's quite floral and strong compared to this one. So just 2/3 of the quantity. But yeah, just so you can see it. There's all kinds of cardamoms out there, as it turns out, but this one, I remember now, having grown up in Malaysia, smelling it in Chinese herbal shops. So they're quite available in those areas. I didn't realize it's what they put into Massaman curry. So so that was sitting inside the slow cooker on a high heat. I cooked the beef chuck with the cream, the bay leaves, the cardamom, pinch of salt. I think I ended up putting about 3 cardamoms in, 2 bay leaves in. So if you're doing half a kilo, you kind of halve that. And I let that cook for about 2.5 hours. 2 hours, half an hour just to bring up the heat in the cooker, just from having gone from off to on. And then 2 hours for it to simmer properly. Anything more than that, and the meat will start to fall apart, which we want to have happen in the curry, not in the slow cooker. So we'll start to maybe simmer that today, and we'll see that start to happen in the curry itself. So 2 hours should do it. If you're using chicken, you want to do at least 3 hours, because chicken has salmonella. We don't want to be sick. And you can always stick a thermometer in to make sure that the meat's at least at 75 degrees Celsius, or the Fahrenheit equivalent. Pardon me if you're not from Australia, don't use the metric system. I don't know the translation for that, but 75 degrees Celsius minimum for the chicken. You could use pork loin. Honestly, with Massaman curry, you could use duck as well. Duck would go really well. And any meat that is already quite tender and fatty is what you want to use. And that's why I wouldn't use chicken breast, because slow cooked, that will turn to be quite tough. Pork loin, Nancy, I think would be great. Duck leg as well would be great. Or if you're doing a vegan option, you just want to use vegetables, you'll need to skip the slow cooker altogether, because you don't need to slow cook meat. I'm not sure. I think oyster blade should be fine as well, Susie, because there's a good amount of fat in that. But yeah, I would just kind of maybe do a quick Google search to make sure. Off of the top of my head, I think it's fine, because usually any kind of flank or shank, even for lamb, would go really well as well. Because if you've got bones, slow cooking in the coconut cream, that's just going to add more bone marrow flavor to it as well. So that's what I did to start just before class. Is one of the pre-work activities. Were there any questions on that other than the ones that have already come through?
No, but I had a question about the cardamom. Because
Yes.
Do you put it in whole, or do you crush that one up?
So we're going to use it twice today, Kathy. We're going to actually we put it in the slow cooker, and for that I just cracked it open and threw it in whole, because I ended up fishing it back out and chucking it after I pulled it out. I should actually show you. This is the coconut cream that came out. So I've separated it from the meat, and we're actually going to use that braised liquid because it's full of flavor. But it's probably floating. I think I caught all of them, Kathy. Maybe one of them's floating in there. But other than that, you can always pull that stuff out, because you're not going to eat that stuff. The second way we use it is in the spice paste, which I'll go through shortly. And for that, yes, I did remove it from the pods. I did take it out completely and just needed the seeds to be put into the grinder to make the powder. But yes, does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. And Danny's got a question as well too.
Oh.
So would you use thigh
or
legs if you were doing the chicken?
That's exactly right, Danny. So even the sort of the thigh cutlets would be fine, or if you wanted to use drumsticks, that'd be fine as well. Those would be better than breast if you're going to use the slow cooker to make it. Another way to make it is to actually just, and if you're using chicken, what I'd recommend, Danny, is if you have ketchup manis, which is the thick soy sauce, the sweet one, I'd douse it in a little bit of soy sauce and fry it if you didn't want to slow cook it. So air fry it, because that's going to make it caramelized and crunchy. And you can always add the coconut cream to the curry when you actually cook the curry, if you wanted a different way to do it. So say, for example, if you did have chicken breast and you didn't want to slow cook it, you could always fry it up with some ketchup manis in the air fryer if you have one, or just bake it in the oven to be healthier. You can always deep fry it if you want, or you could use chicken thigh or chicken legs in the slow cooker with the coconut cream. Cool.
That's all the questions.
All right, so that was the braising liquid. Again, full of flavor, looks completely yucky, I'll be honest, but actually full of flavor, and folds in nicely into the curry later on. So that's the first bit of pre-work I did. Another bit of pre-work I did, as I mentioned before as well, was the pineapple juice. So I've just heated that up in a pot, and you can see how it's frothed up a little bit because I've heated it up again, just to kind of kill that. If you're into science, it's bromelain. That's the name of the enzyme that we want to make sure is completely dead, so it doesn't go and interfere with the taste of the coconut cream. Now, the other amount of pre-work we did was the spice mix. So I have all of it here. So I've gone ahead and roasted all of this and grinded it up, and I've got that ready to go into the curry paste that will blend in a second. But I'll just walk you through real quick. So we talked about the bay leaf. So I have another 2 going in here. So 4 in total, 2 in the slow cooker and 2 in the pot. So if you say, for example, we're doing a vegan option and you didn't put anything into the slow cooker, you're more than welcome to blend an extra 2 into the paste, because this actually is just a very delicate, savory type cinnamon sort of a flavor. That's really where this leaf comes from. It comes from a cassia cinnamon tree. There's like 4,000 types of cinnamons in the world. This particular one comes from generally the region in South Asia and Central Asia. So that's the bay leaf. I've got about a half bit of nutmeg here. Again, this all gets grinded after being roasted. And just on roasting, I do roast them all separately because the nutmeg is going to take a little bit more time to roast compared to cumin seeds, right? So I just want to make sure I don't end up burning it, because burning it ends up adding bitterness to it. We don't want the bitterness. So, yeah, bay leaves, we've got the nutmeg, we've got about 6 cloves over here. So just 6 of them toasted up. These, as I forget who asked now, but I think maybe Kathy yourself, I do take out the seeds. So we do want to remove the pods away, and we just want the seeds to be added into the coffee or spice grinder. We then also have cumin seeds. So this is just regular cumin, or also some folks call it white cumin. We have white pepper. So if you don't have white pepper, you can use black pepper. I would halve it because black pepper is quite strong, and really what we want is the flavor of the white pepper. We're actually not using pepper here for any kind of heat because we're going to add a little bit of chili. So that's again very unique to Southeast Asia and South Asia. So one of my favorite peppers, to be very honest. I prefer it to black pepper. This is a bay leaf. This bay leaf is just a regular bay laurel leaf, and I just thought I think I've done this before, but just in case anyone's joining today that hasn't before, you can see the difference there, just the vines of the leaves and how a bay laurel leaf is the one that goes into most other types of cuisine. What we're using here is an Indian bay leaf or cassia bay leaf, and it's got the vines coming from where my finger is at the bottom instead of a regular leaf. So I like sharing that because it kind of very visually tells you the difference between the two, and we want to be using this one today. I'm just trying to think, was there any other prep work that I did? Yes, I did end up, and we'll jump into this in a second, but this here is desiccated coconut that I've toasted. And it's really important to toast this. I would say if you were running low on time and you didn't have time to roast the spices, that's totally fine. But the coconut you kind of want to. It really brings out the flavor. A coconut's quite nice on its own, but it'll be very similar to coconut cream if you don't roast the desiccated coconut, which means you're adding more of the same thing. This ends up caramelizing it and kind of gives a really nice rounded flavor to the dish. So with that, we're going to start. Actually, I was going to do a little bit of a show and tell for Galangal. Does anyone know what Galangal is? Because that's one of the things that's going to go into the spice paste today. It looks very similar to ginger, doesn't it? Do I have any ginger over there? I do, actually. So this is your regular old ginger as opposed to young ginger. So that's just what it is. And I would call ginger, turmeric, and galangal probably in the same family. They all come in as a form of root vegetable. They all have very different flavors. They're all peppery. So they're hot, but they're not hot from a chili scoliosis, I think is the word perspective. No, I'm sure that's not the right word, but the measure of heat or chili, which is different to that is measured for turmeric, ginger, and galangal. It has a peppery taste to it, so it brings heat without adding too much chili, which I quite like. So ginger is something that you could use instead of galangal today if you don't, because galangal is available, I think, in some grocery stores, but not all. You can add maybe just a squeeze of lime or lemon, just like an itty bitty bit to kind of bring out the sort of the flavor of galangal. I mean, if you can just get your hands on galangal, that'd be better. But if you can't, then yeah, just replace galangal with ginger and just add a pinch of lemon or lime to it. Now, it is very hard to cut galangal like that. And I'm not going to try and do that because it's very woody. What we want to do is just kind of peel it like we would an apple, I suppose, if you like. But underneath there already, you can see there's a lot of beautiful flesh. And that's the stuff we want to use today. But yes, it's just a little bit appealing, and don't worry too much about, oh, have I cut off too much galangal flesh? You want to make sure that the outer layer is not there at all. Otherwise, it ends up adding a bit of sort of fibrous bitterness to the dish, and we don't want that. So I'm not going to use all of this. I'll probably use just about half of it because I just need about a tablespoon's worth of galangal today. I roast spices, I want to make sure it's on a stove and I can actually smell it as it's cooking, because it goes from warm to burnt very fast, because spices typically have a lot of oil in them and roasting them brings out the oil. But if you roast it at too high a heat, you end up burning it, and that's what introduces bitterness. So all of that to say, when you do it in the oven, unless you're using a very, very, very low heat, you miss out on the opportunity to catch it before it tips over from warm to burnt. And that's why I like to do it on the stovetop. So if you're doing like a big batch and maybe you just kind of want to do it in the oven, that's totally fine, because you'll end up having to roast these spices separately anyway. They all have different sort of time for roasting in terms of how long it takes. There we go.
And
hopefully that answers that.
That's all right, because Cindy's got a follow-on question, is how far in advance do you recommend toasting the spices?
Yeah, I mean, if you are going to roast it, and again, you don't have to, it's totally just to kind of bring out the oils in it, which ends up happening when you actually cook the paste that the spice goes into. So if you absolutely don't have time, or you don't think you can do it within a day, Cindy, then skip it. Because even if you do it within a day, it just goes back to being sort of shelved, if you know what I mean. And you want to do it preferably right before, like I've done mine this morning before I ground the spices up, so that you can use it whilst all those oils are awake and out. Otherwise, you can just trust that once it's grinded up and thrown into the coconut cream that we'll cook it in today, it'll get cooked, and some of those flavors will pop out as well. It's funny, people go, why would you want to add chili to food if you lived in Southeast Asia? Because it's so freaking hot. And don't mind me, I'm going to bash this guy with this just real quick. But before I do that, the reason is because when you're in Southeast Asia, so growing up for me over there, it's so hot that you almost want to break a sweat eating, so that the consequence of having done that allows the body to cool from the outside. So it's counterintuitive that people over there would like to eat chili, and you'd be surprised we're crazy about it. And it's actually because it makes us feel nice and cool after having eaten it. So, but yes, fun fact for you guys. I'm just going to try and bash this, and if I can't, might do it on the floor. That's going well. So I'm basically breaking the fibers so that I don't blow the motor on the blender, because otherwise it'll get stuck in there. And that's what I've already done with the ginger as well. Basically, these guys are really fibrous, and we want to make sure that it just doesn't have to overwork the blade in the blender. Yes. Right, this is about a tablespoon's worth of galangal, and that's enough. So I'm going to chuck this guy aside. I'm going to put him onto the tray over here, and then I'm just going to show you all the different things that we are going to be blending up today in the blender. And traditionally, you can use the mortar and pestle that I just used, but it takes a lot of work, and I don't feel like work this morning, if I was being completely honest. And so, but yeah, you would get like, the traditional sort of proper bicep and tricep workout having done that. If you wanted to, you're more than welcome to get all kinds of mortar and pestles. The one I use is more of a flat one. It's used more to make sambal, or you could get the traditional ones, which are round and you kind of just pound at it. But yeah, so.
Yeah, I discovered I needed to ground up some oats with other things, and it said to do it in the blender, and I'm like blending away and nothing was really moving, and I'm like poking. And when I actually tipped it out, it had cooked the oats at the bottom. So then the next time I needed to do it, I actually put the oats in the mortar and pestle and just ground them around that way. Much easier, less mess, and wasn't cooked.
It's funny, right? Because what ends up happening, even with any curry paste, typically we kind of go, oh yeah, I'm going to use the blender, and we think the blender is going to do all the work. What ends up happening if you don't kind of, as I've done here, oops, I haven't actually cut the onion. I might need to work on that while we chat. But what you actually have to do is you do need to mince it down quite a bit, because as you rightly pointed out with those oats, Kathy, it ends up cooking the paste in the blender, and we actually don't want that, because that actually makes it really globby and kind of it gets cooked without oil, And when that happens, we basically don't bring out much of the flavor from all the spices, which defeats the purpose of making a spice paste, which is really sad if you think about it. So it takes a little bit of work. It takes less work than having to mortar and pestle it, but doing as much as you can to break down everything to as small as you can. So we've got, as I'll show you here, the galangal and the garlic. Garlic's pretty soft, so I'm not too worried about it. But I've also done that here with the ginger. So I've got quite a bit of ginger there that I'm using today. I've got the coriander stems, not the leaves, the stems. So if you don't have coriander stems, you can use coriander seeds, and you would put that into the paste, the powder that we made before. About 2 teaspoons should cover this amount of stems. But it's a great way to use the stems instead of just throwing them away, because you don't end up eating it. You just use the leaves. So that's that. We've got 2 lemongrass here, again, bashed up and then sliced, because once it's bashed, the fibers loosen, and then you can slice with a serrated knife pretty easily. Got 2 sort of lengths of it. Again, usually if you have a nice long lemongrass, you kind of take the third closest to the root that's not green. The green one's really fibrous and kind of bitter as well. So we use that for tea. I actually always make tisane with it, if you like, with ginger and pandan leaves. And then what we have in the middle here are what I was referring to before, is the little bits of chili that are going in. These are dried. And what we're actually going to do today, unlike other times where I've made curry, Massaman curry actually requires that you cook this stuff in water, so it softens it further before you actually blend it, which I think is great, because it's gonna, and that's why I haven't soaked these in water, because we're just gonna go ahead and soak them in the pan with water first before we add everything else. So with that, I might actually start. So with these guys over here, the peanuts aren't going to need to go into the pan yet. Sorry, not the pan. Yeah, actually, you're not going to need to go into the pan. The peanut and the coconut are going to go into the blender with all of this once it's cooked in the pan. So I might switch cameras to the pan so you can start to see that get cooked while I slice up the onions, which I forgot to do this morning. Whoops. So I'll quickly switch that up. Nice high heat to kind of bring up the water. So I'll put about just shy of a cup of water in here. And I'm going to put a big glob of salt in, but not yet. I'll put it in once all the other ingredients are in. So it's going to pull out the flavor from the ingredients. But that can go in first while it starts to bubble up. And then this is going to be me chopping up my onions real quick. All right. Now that's starting to boil. So the first thing I want to have go in is actually the lemongrass, because he's really tough. So that's going to go in first. And we'll let that sort of come to the simmer before we add the next thing, and then progressively like that. So I'm going in, and this is just sort of my way of doing it, because the lemongrass, typically if the ginger is really old and dry, I'd throw that in first, but the ginger is looking pretty juicy today, so I figured lemongrass first. But we'll keep going in with the thing that's the sort of the driest and most fibrous, so that it has a chance to soften, with the coriander probably going in last. So I'm just going to go in with the ginger now. I'm going to go in with the galangal now. Whoop, into the pan rather than next to it. There we go. I'm just going to get that in there nice and soft. Cut that bit out because it looks pretty woody to me. There we go. So I'm just going in with lots of salt, as you can see right now. Big solid pinch. But yes, hopefully that came through in the video. But yes, there are lots of options, lots of different things for us to try. And really great that you guys are making these suggestions as well, because then we can kind of get a little bit of an understanding of where you had it before, and you know why you'd want to learn how to make it too, just to give us a little bit of history and a story to go with it. Because I know, like, for example, Chinatown's where I usually go to get my baos because it's so good. And there's like the egg kind, the custard kind, the pork kind, the chicken kind. It's so yummy.
Okay, son-in-law eggs. What are they?
Oh, they're basically boiled eggs. And then once you boil them, you fry them on the outside skin so you get a nice crust. And then it's a matter of making the sauce that gets poured on top of it when you slice it in half. Yeah, it's just like another, like it's a sanchoy bao. It's like a nice little entree that's usually served at Chinese restaurants. The name has quite a bit of history, which is interesting. But that's essentially what son-in-law eggs are. So most of the water has been absorbed, and that's exactly what I wanted to have happen because I wanted some of that sort of ginger and lemongrass to get rehydrated so that it blends easier. I suspect that I'm still going to need to put some water into the blender to help the blender blade along, but I'll start without it. Some of the other things that I'll be adding in are also these guys here. I'll just use this camera lens so you can see it. So we talked about spice powder before. It's not zooming in, there we go. That's the peanuts, and then that's the desiccated coconuts, all of which have been roasted so that they bring out that flavor. I'm gonna start with this first. So I'm gonna very slowly and delicately put it into the jug, blender jug that I have. I'm gonna try and go in with most of everything mixed in so that it has an opportunity to blend evenly. And then again, we'll add water. The next thing we'll add would be the coconut first, followed by the peanuts, and then finally the spice powder at the very end. And absolutely no oil goes into this, again, for the same reason of the heat kind of turning the paste into a bit of a glob. Adding oil here will end up emulsifying the paste, which means it'll change the science behind it. It'll change the molecular structure of the paste, and it makes it very, very globby and not good for making a spice curry paste is what you need to know. So don't add oil at any point, because sometimes you go, oh yeah, I'll just throw some oil in. That's oil will, kind of loosen everything up. But when you blend it at a high speed, it actually changes it and emulsifies the whole thing, which is not what we want to have happen. And we want the oil to cook it from the outside. When I say that, I mean when we add it to the coconut milk coconut cream that we added to in the wok, it's going to cook from the outside. So we don't want it to cook from the inside, which is to say all the oil gets mayonnaised into the paste, and that's not good for the paste at all. So there we go. We have our little jug. So I'm going to try and blend that first and see if I need to add water into it. I will go on mute because it's no fun listening to a loud blender in the morning, is it? So I'm going to go do that now, and then I'll come back and show you what that paste looks like. I might put him up here so you can take a look. So that's just it really quickly before I do go in. It's everything that's in there, and it's nice and hot. So we're going to go in and blend. I'll be right back. So real quick, I've got that. It ended up blending quite well. So I ended up putting about just under a cup of water into the pan, and that did the trick. So it was really about rehydrating the vegetables instead of trying to put water and dry vegetables in here. I think that's what made it blend quite quickly. I'm going to go in now with the desiccated coconut. And as I add these things, I might need to add more water, but we'll just kind of go one at a time. So desiccated coconut first, and then we'll blend that. And that's actually very reminiscent of rendang. Rendang actually has very dry roasted coconut that goes into it. So that's where you kind of start to see the influences scatter itself across all the way from India to Thailand, to Malaysia, to Singapore, to Indonesia. So I'm going to go on mute again. I'll be right back. Keep chatting. I've just put the peanuts in the blender, and I'm going to try and give that a whiz. It might need water, but we'll see. But yes, so this is with a little bit of extra water. The peanuts did kind of give it a little bit of sort of a crunch to work through. So I did add that water. So it's looking really smooth. As you can see now, it's kind of got a yellowy orangey color, which doesn't look like Massaman curry. So we'll see that color change throughout the recipe. But what I'm going to do now is add the final thing, which is the spice powder that I had, just to kind of make sure it's mixed in there. And then we can get started with the wok and start cooking. But yes, that's going to go in. And hopefully won't need any water. So final blend, and then we'll switch things up and start doing the wok on the stove, but I'll be back. Just real quick, what I had to do was, and this happens often with blenders, after adding the spice powder is it wouldn't blend, but what ended up happening was the blender blade created a vacuum underneath. So rather than trying to add more water, sometimes it's always good to just stir it up and make sure that that vacuum is popped so that that air comes out. And then I'm going to give it a final whiz, but it's looking pretty good. So there we go. It's almost done. I've just mixed in the paste, and I'm going to take it out from the jug, and then we can get started. This smells really amazing, by the way, because it's actually hot. I wanted to make sure I didn't blend it for too long so that it didn't start to cook in here in terms of it being cooked with oil, because it has none, but it smells really great. Anyway, so all right, so I've got my big wok up here. Hopefully you can start to see what I'll do in it. But what we're going to start with is a nice high heat. I am going to go in with a little bit of peanut oil because I like the flavor of peanuts. We've put peanuts into the paste. We'll be putting whole peanuts into the curry as well. And so peanut oil, I think, will nicely round that off. Just a little bit because the coconut cream is about to go in as well, the way traditional Thai cooking is done, which is to crack the coconut. And I'll explain why I won't be able to do that today in a second. But just a little bit of oil. We're going to start, once that oil starts to heat up, we're going to go in with just an itty bitty cassia stick, cinnamon stick. Again, not Ceylon cinnamon or cinnamon curls, the sticks that curl up. This is more of a bark. You can get them in Indian grocery stores. Typically, they're just called cinnamon bark or sometimes cinnamon stick, but you'll know the difference between the regular Ceylon, which is more used for desserts, versus the ones that we use for savory cooking, which is this guy here. So he's already sizzling up really nicely, which means my pan is quite hot. I'm going to go straight in with coconut milk, and we're going to need to cook that a little bit. That's completely normal. It will splatter. The reason I won't be able to crack the coconut milk today is because this is canned coconut milk. So typically in Thai cooking, you would fry coconut milk so that the coconut milk, the milk protein in the coconut would split from the fat. And so that's called cracking it, so that you start to pull the oil out from the coconut cream to cook the curry paste in. It's also the other reason I added just a little bit of peanut oil to make sure that it has the opportunity to cook the spice paste properly. Cracking the coconut would mean that we'll start to see oil come out the corners and maybe a little bit in the middle, and it would separate from the blobs of cream or fat from the coconut that would be in there. So that's really called cracking the coconut. If you, sometimes you see in any Thai cooking show, they'll be like trying to make sure that they cook the coconut until it cracks. That's what they're doing. But today we're just going to bring it up to a heat to make sure it's hot enough to then start frying the paste in. So I'll stop because I'm sure there'll be questions about that. But yes.
I always thought cracking the coconut meant cracking actually.
I know, cracking the coconut.
So did I, until I read a book about, cracking coconut in Thai cooking actually means a whole different thing. Got it.
Yeah.
Yes, now I'm educated. So that's that one. So how we're going to do this is we're going to put once this comes up to a heat, it's not there yet, starting to get there. We'll put the paste in first. And this now needs to drop. Once the coconut and oil are hot, this paste, particularly because of the coconut and peanuts in it, can burn very quickly. So we need to bring the heat down. We need to slowly sort of simmer it while it cooks in with the coconut milk. And then we'll gradually add the things that need to go in a particular order, which I'll call out. But yeah, that's starting to look really good. As you can see, it's bubbling up and it's starting to really sort of, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that actually. I'm just gonna quickly put him aside so I can put the paste in. As soon as the paste goes in, I'll bring the heat down, but I want to give the paste a chance to warm up while I'm putting it in before I bring the heat down.
She's just complimenting you on the idea to pop the oil in to make sure that it toasts, to have the spices fry.
Yeah, and just all that wonderful stuff like the ginger, the garlic, the everything, right? Just making sure that we give it a chance to properly cook. Like even in Malaysian cooking, a lot of the time, what ends up happening is they end up using a lot of oil because until you actually cook everything through properly, you don't end up having a chance to fully appreciate the flavors in there. And like I remember sitting down with this very good friend of mine. She's teaching me how to make traditional Malay food. And she's like, yeah, what we typically do after we cook the food is we put it in a plate and we tip the plate. And so they'll collect the food at the top and let the oil drain, because you don't end up eating the oil. In this case, you do, because we're not putting that much. But in some recipes where you literally need the spices and all the ingredients swimming in the oil, you do end up taking the oil out, because that's not for consumption. It's actually just to pull all those flavors out to make sure you get to eat it without the oil that was able to extract it out, if that makes sense.
Such a pretty color. It doesn't look like the color of Massaman curry that I've ever had.
Yeah,
is it going to change color?
It should, but it just needs to be cooked on a very low heat. So the next thing I'm going to add in, which will start to change the color, and the reason I'm adding it in now is because I do want it to, is palm sugar. So I have blocks of palm sugar here that are slowly going to melt as I throw them in. And we are going to let that just sort of drop in so it's just glamlaco palm sugar in solid form. You can get granulated form. If you don't have that, you can just get raw sugar, any dark sugar. If you have jaggery, which is Indian sugar, that'll work too. But we basically just want to give that an opportunity to melt into the curry, because that sweetness we really want to see come through. And then I'm going to cover it up on a low heat, because it's going to splatter if I leave it uncovered. Yeah, we're just going to let that slowly but surely. I want to see those sugar cubes melt. And so that should change the color a little bit. So typically what we're looking to do is like any traditional curry dish, whether it's Malay, Indian, not Chinese, Malay, Indian, Thai, we need that, we need the water that's gone into it to evaporate. That's the first thing. The second thing is we need for the spices to cook. That only happens once the water starts to evaporate. And then we need for the oil to start to separate, which again, we won't see today because we put very little peanut oil in, and the coconut milk is emulsified. That's what makes them last long in cans. They add an emulsifier to make sure the milk and the fat stay together. That's why we can't crack it, like I said before. So we won't see so much of the separation, but we should see a color change, and we'll definitely look to smell. So we're looking to smell cooked onion, cooked ginger, cooked garlic, because we don't want it to be raw. That makes the curry go rancid faster if we don't let it cook all the way through. So we're just going to let that simmer. I'll very shortly add the meat to it, because even though the meat's been cooking in coconut cream, we want to get some of that spice mixture enveloped into it as well. I just want to make sure that that sugar melts before I do that. Some of the other things that'll be going in while that's covered up is tamarind puree. So I'm just going to put them down here so you can see them. So that's the meat over there. Tamarind puree. And these are the things that make it. So in addition to lemongrass and galangal, which is very Thai or Southeast Asian, tamarind and fish sauce make it Thai. You take those things out, you've got an Indian curry, basically. And pineapple juice, probably the other thing. So that's where the derivation comes from. They've used Thai cardamoms. You can use green cardamoms. There's a particular type of, instead of Indian bay leaf, you use turmeric leaf. But it's just basic. It's interesting to see that the Indian heritage that was brought over then got sort of acclimatized with Thai Siamese monarch culture, which then had the Thai cardamoms swapped over, the turmeric leaf swapped over, and some of these other things added in. So I think that's quite marvelous, because you start to learn the history, you start to learn sort of how cultures, appreciated other cultures, right? And decided to adapt and adopt some of the things that resonated with them, which is always so good. So yeah.
And do you put potatoes in it?
I do. So what I've done, part of the other pre-work, and thanks for calling that out, Kathy, because I've forgotten about that. A traditional vegan version of this dish would be something that you would want to do just vegetables with, right? And so in the recipe card that I sent over, I gave some wonderful options to do that with. And so today I'll be doing a couple of different things. I'll quickly show you. So I've actually air fried these potatoes. So these are, you can see that they're, I cut them in half, or I just kind of cut them into wedges really, and I air fried them, which means they're almost pretty much cooked. So I did them, I think, at 180 degrees in an air fryer for about 20 minutes. So in wedge form. So that's one thing that's going in. The other thing that's going in is eggplant. So I've just kind of, again, air fried these. You could deep fry them. You could certainly put them into the oven and just make sure that they're par cooked. They don't have to be cooked all the way through, because we will put them into the curry and allow it to kind of soak up all the goodness. And that's why I actually like air frying them, because it's not introducing more oil, it's actually taking out moisture, so that these guys act as sponges when they go into the curry and they really start to soak up the curry that's in there. Go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, it's just making me so hungry.
No, that's okay. The other thing that goes in is onions. So these are shallots. You can always use banana shallots or French shallots, but I've used red shallots, and I've also air fried these. So typically so potatoes, yes, absolutely needs to be in Massaman curry. Onions, or sometimes you can use pickled onions if you don't have these sorts of onions or can't get your hands on banana or French shallots. Mandatory, they need to go. So if you go to like in Melbourne, if you go to, because I did do this, I went to Chin Chin the other day and I had their Massaman curry. Those are the things that are in there, along with the peanuts that we'll be adding in as well. So if you want like a restaurant style Massaman curry, those things are mandatory. Now, if you're not using meat, obviously you're going to be using other vegetables that are going to go into it. I'm just stirring this, so bear with me. I don't want it to splatter. It's going to need a couple more minutes before the meat goes in, and then I'll show you the color of it. But yes, so if you want to use other vegetables, some of the vegetables that I've recommended for the vegan option is things like butternut squash, which you can again air fry. I think I also put things in there like bamboo shoots if you like, because that makes it very Thai as well. Watermelon rind. So one of the things that we actually end up serving Massaman curry with is watermelon. So I will show you that a bit later. And it's traditional to serve it with watermelon because the freshness and the crunchiness of watermelon complements the creaminess and the spice and the tanginess of Massaman curry. So if you are going to be serving it with watermelon, then don't throw away the rind. Use that instead into the curry. So you can use any vegetable really. You can use cauliflower if you like, whatever your preference is. But that would be something that I would recommend air frying, because it just gives that texture when you end up eating the curry, and it ends up being quite delicious. Instead of it being just kind of, like, when you cook a potato in curry, it's great. Don't get me wrong. That smells really great. This smells really great, by the way. Don't get me wrong. It's great. But what you don't end up getting is just the ability to, just be able to enjoy the potato without the starch. So even when these potatoes were air fried, I sliced them up and soaked them in water first for at least a good 30 minutes before I fried them up in the air fryer, just to pull out all that starch, so that it really acts as less of a starchy thing and more of sort of a potato filling thing, if that makes sense. So this is the chuck beef that's going in now. I'm just going to slowly sort of drop that in and put that to the side and just kind of bring that up to the heat before I then think about how much of the braising liquid I want to add. So I just want that to kind of hang out with the spices first, like I said before. Give that an opportunity to stir in. And you don't necessarily have to do it in a big wok like I'm doing. I just happen to have it and wanted to show you guys the traditional way of making it. You can do it in a pot. Pot's totally fine, just so long as it's not a soup pot, because that's a little bit deep. Although you could use the soup pot for while you are braising it, because that's going to allow it to sit quite nicely for 2 hours on the stovetop. If you decide that you don't want to use your slow cooker or don't have one, you can use a stock pot or a regular pot for it. So you can use those things to cook. So I'm just going to let that simmer now for a couple minutes, probably somewhere between 5 to 10, because I do want it to, 2 things. I want the curry to completely cook, the paste, and then I also want to make sure that the meat's starting to get incorporated in there before we add the tamarind, the fish sauce, the pineapple juice, and at the end we'll add the peanuts. So, and that'll be after we add the potatoes and the eggplant and the onions and the braising liquid. So there's quite a few things that still need to go in, but we just have to be a little bit patient, because Massaman curry is something that requires quite a bit of patience to get to the end state. Here I go with the braising liquid. So I'm going to go in with half of it just to mix it in before they add a little bit more. I just want enough in there to be able to add to the potatoes and the eggplant and things like that. So just, it's gonna go from being, and the reason I did that was because I had given it a smell. Everything's cooked. I can smell the onions and ginger and garlic and everything else in there. And now I can actually start to bring up the heat as well, because I've got more liquid in there. It's not gonna scorch anything unnecessarily. And it also allows me to start to, so can you see how that curry color has been changing all this time through? It went from being really yellow to now kind of a mellow orange. And the longer you cook it, the darker it gets. So it's really up to you in terms of how dark you want it to get. I'm gonna go in with the onions and eggplant first. So just gonna let that go in and sit around in there. And get sort of meshed in with the curry. And then I'll decide if I want to add more braising liquid or if that's enough before I start to add the flavors, the tamarind, the fish sauce, and so forth. The potatoes will go in for me at the very end because it's already cooked all the way. But if yours were par cooked, then you might want to throw them in now so that it gets a chance to cook properly with the curry. But what else was I going to say? Yes, with the tamarind and the fish sauce, it really depends on what you're going to be serving the Massaman curry with. This is important because the tamarind is really tangy and the fish sauce is really salty. So if you're serving it with, say, you know, like the pineapple rice that I just talked about, which is really creamy and rich, I probably go to at the upper end of the ingredients list that I sent, which is I think about 2 tablespoons of fish sauce, 4 tablespoons of tamarind puree. And tamarind puree is different from tamarind water. If you're using tamarind water by washing the tamarind pulp, you probably want to at least do 1.5 to 2 times the amount I put in the recipe because the puree is more concentrated. But again, it really depends on what you're having the dish with. Now, if you're having the dish with, say, for example, just flatbread, which doesn't necessarily have any sweetness or anything creaminess like that, I dial back the fish sauce and the tamarind because that might be too much for you to have with the dish. So it really depends on what you're eating with and also who's eating it. If someone who doesn't like a lot of tanginess and fish sauciness, don't put too much of it in. Just put half first, give it a taste. If you think that you should add more, you can go ahead and add it at the very end after adding the pineapple juice. So the pineapple juice doesn't go in until the very end. And once you've mixed that in, give that a final taste. And then if you decide, oh, I think I need a little bit of tamarind water or fish sauce, go ahead and add that in. But yes, it smells really good. I'm very excited for lunch. I'm going to go in with the peanuts. These are roasted, as you can tell. This is, again, one of those mandatory things about Massaman curry. I'm not waiting to put it in at the end. I don't mind putting it in now because it's been roasted. So it's just going to add a bit of texture to the curry when you eat it, but it won't lose its crunchiness because you're adding it in now because the fire is quite low. I'm probably going to think about adding in a little bit more of the braising liquid so that the potatoes have enough curry to float around in. So I'm going to go ahead and actually add all of it in. And I might end up adding a bit more fish sauce and tamarind because it's extra liquid as well. So you typically end up using, the recipe I sent kind of calls for about 400 mils of coconut cream. I've doubled the recipe. So you end up, for me, I'll end up using somewhere between 800 mils to a whole liter of coconut cream. So that also becomes a factor when you are adding in the fish sauce and tamarind and pineapple juice as well. So you don't want to add too little or too much. And most of all, you want to add enough that you enjoy it. So yeah, so I'm just going to bring that up to high heat while I put the potatoes in so that it completely brings everything up to a heat before I start adding the final bits, and then we'll be pretty much done. This is just the fish sauce going in at the moment. So I'm going to put that in first. And then I'm going to go in with the tamarind and decide if I need more as well by tasting it. That is very good. I don't need to add anything else to that. So I'm going to just throw in the pineapple juice. That is it, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm just covering that up now to give it one final, bring the whole thing up to a heat. And then it's going to be ready to eat after I give it a final taste and decide what I want to add to it. If I want to add any fish sauce, sugar. So fish sauce is salt, basically. And you'll see, other than during the spice paste, I haven't added any salt because there's enough salt in the spice paste. I gave it a good solid round, and then also fish sauce is salty. So I can decide between the saltiness, tamarind, which will be the sweetness, alternatively pineapple juice, if I want to add more liquid, but I think this has enough liquid in it already. So if I wanted sour, I'd add a little bit more tamarind. And yeah, those three elements should be good. I'm not going to try and make it bitter or spicy because I think it's covered. But yes, I can hear it coming to a heat. So I'll show that to you in a second. And then we'll be ready to plate. Doesn't need anything else. The pineapple juice added sourness with sweetness. And it just doesn't need any more. So I'm gonna switch it off. Yeah, and now if you wanted to slow cook it, you could continue slow cooking it on a very low heat up to an hour. Especially if you thought your potatoes weren't completely cooked, or you added other vegetables that needed more time. But very low heat, and I wouldn't go for more than an hour. But it will just kind of allow those flavors to really start to hang out and get to know each other a little bit better. But yeah, there you have it. That's the Massaman curry, and so you can serve that up with the pineapple rice that I mentioned at the start of the call. Here are some of the things that are going to go on top. That on my right is fried onions. So you can either make these yourselves or buy it in like a jar. They usually sell them at Asian grocers, and granulated peanut. And so these will go really nicely on top as a garnish. So that's something that we're going to add. The other two things that we'll add is, and these are all optional, you don't have to, but we'll add coriander leaves, just some coriander springs, and some nice red chilies just to give the color. These are not spicy. If anything, these will make the dish spicy, if that makes sense. And by that, I mean chili. And then the other thing that I mentioned as well that we'll be doing is adding watermelon. So watermelon is something that you end up serving this on the side, cubed watermelon. And then I just have some lime wedges here in case you want to add, in case it's not tangy enough. And if you don't use the lime wedges for the curry, use them for the watermelon. Watermelon tastes so much better with lime on it. Most tropical fruits taste so much better with any kind of acid on it, lime or lemon, but especially lime. Papaya is another example. After I had papaya with lime juice on it, my mind was blown. I never went back. Watermelon's the same. Mom's nodding along, so we have her endorsement. So I'm just going to go in with what I mentioned before. So a little bit of the fried onions first, just kind of scatter that over the top. And then I'll go in with a little bit of peanuts because, you know, it's fun to do peanuts. There's not enough peanuts. I'm like a peanut butter lover, and more peanuts is more peanuts for me personally. And then we'll just go in with a couple of slices of the chili just to kind of give it a little bit of color contrast. And we will finally go in with some coriander springs. Stew them all over. And voila, you have that with your rice and your watermelon on the side and some lime. And there you have it. Massaman curry with pineapple coconut rice. Yeah, I'm pretty excited because this is lunch for me.